Hello, everybody. We're here for our little after-show program, Last Call. It's still, kind of early in the afternoon, but if you guys want to drink, go right ahead.
I mean, I just got coffee.
Coffee, and I'm almost out of my tea. It's kind of a teetotaler kind of day. But we're here with both Dave and Sam to talk about them some more, but in a different context than Composers in Academia, which we did in the main show. We're here to talk about, both of these guys are founding members of the SoundNotion podcast, which started in 2010 and produced 236 episodes over its entire run, which I think you guys ran for about 6 years until 2016. But if you didn't know what SoundNotion was, it was a weekly podcast dedicated to the discussion of new music and current events in the concert music world. And I was fortunate enough to be a guest on a few of the episodes. Friend of the show, I think is what my official title was at that point. And I have to say, it was a remarkably diverse show because they spent a great deal of time talking about heavy-duty, nitty-gritty composer stuff, like super meta composer stuff. And then they'd have these shows that we would just sit around and talk about labor relations. Right? And they were interested and interesting in a way that was ahead of its time, like the show itself was ahead of its time. From your very first episode, you guys launched this as a video podcast series, correct?
Yes.
Yes, which
multi-camera.
Remember, this is 2010 multi-camera video podcast series, and this was before the age of Zoom and Google Meet, and Skype was still relatively young at that point in time. Broadband certainly wasn't a thing because the vast majority of your guests were all remote, even in the early days, right?
I don't know if we ever had an in-person guest. I'm trying to think. Maybe we had some subs in the early days, but I don't think we ever had a proper guest that was in person.
Yeah.
But you guys, as the host, the group, there was usually 3 or 4 of you who were there. It started off, everyone was in the same room together. And then you kind of moved your separate ways and started to do the remote thing that way. You guys were truly pioneers in this sense. And this is the stuff that some groups right now are having to figure out from scratch. And it's a completely different environment. So I wanted to sit and chat about just that. The actual podcast itself, how it was ahead of its time, how it influenced the industry, and the lessons that you guys learned through all of that.
Wow. I would say, I guess the inspiration to do anything like this, we modeled a lot of what we were doing on people that were doing similar things with much larger budgets in other fields. But the gear that we were using and the facility with that gear really came from a project that we had started a couple of years earlier while we were in graduate school to live stream concerts, specifically our own concerts. We didn't live stream any string quartet stuff. We were just streaming the new music stuff, the composers' concerts that happened, 3 to 5 times a semester, and occasionally 1 or 2 other things. And we got the composition area at Michigan State to let us just basically have an old Dell tower that was unused in the computer lab, and we put in about, couple $100 worth of hardware into that to let it capture camera feeds, and used cameras that we already had. And we got the department to buy us a software application that was specifically for this, and a rolly cart to put all this stuff on.
An $800 app for live video switching, which
I believe still exists. It's called VidBlaster, and it might be VidBlaster X now, but it's a Windows. This is 20 years.
Somebody
or
was
whatever.
coattailing on Sound Blaster at that point in time.
I guess so. Written by just one guy, Mike Versteeg, and it was very costly because there's not a lot of competition in this field at the time. And it did all the things that we needed. It switched cameras. You could combine camera views if you wanted, though we never did. You could do
our
live.
100-foot S-video cables that had a lot of money.
A couple of us, myself and Nate Bliton, don't tell anybody at Michigan State University this, we went up to MSU late one night to run an Ethernet cable to where we were positioning this during concerts, and we actually drilled a hole in the wall of the concert hall so that we could have the cable run like from where it was plugged in into this part of the place where we needed it. This concert hall has since been completely renovated, and so there's no evidence of this anymore. So I feel less self-conscious about saying this, but we literally did have a power drill, and we really did drill a hole in the wall of the music building at Michigan State University. Please don't take my degrees away. So that's where all this came from. Is that we had developed the skills and the practices around doing these live streams of concerts with 2 or 3 cameras. And graphic overlays for the program information and all this other stuff was all rolling in live for our own performances.
We determined right away that we didn't want to do a heavily post-produced. So if you've ever seen any of the shows, with the occasional exception for technical difficulties or whatever, it's basically start, go, record, stop, and that's what gets posted. Because we're turning one around every week. So
there was no Adobe Premiere involved.
Yeah.
I think there probably was to trim the beginning and end, and I don't think we were, especially at the beginning, we were not rolling in the intro live.
Yeah, we
later we did,
later.
But we did. We were not rolling in the intro live at the time. But yeah, it was very, very little editing, and if there was an edit in Premiere, it like doubled the post-production time, right? Because you got to import the thing, trim the beginning and end, export the thing, and upload it. And this was even really before YouTube was kind of the monopoly of web video that it is today. Mm-hmm. And I think today we might have, if we were starting it today doing basically exactly the same thing, we would probably record the audio and release the audio as a podcast and then just upload the video to YouTube. Which we continued to do.
We continued to do after, didn't we? We would like whatever.
At some
the Skype
point,
feed.
we switched over from Skype to Google Hangouts, and then you could directly live stream to YouTube from Google Hangouts, and I think that's what's up there now, which is a little messier because we didn't do any edits on those, but was considerably easier than what we were doing before.
But to me, figuring out this kind of a sort of dumping ground of how to make stuff happen is perfect for composers because that's what you're always doing is trying to figure out how to problem solve and make the performance go off. And I think probably more than a lot of other music majors in school, we're sort of obligated to become familiar with technology. At least it's understood that that's what you're expected to do a lot more than like a bass major or something.
Well, and let's look at this with context, too, because I do remember there were groups at that time, roughly, that were trying to do sort of this idea of let's have a classical music-focused show. And we're going to be talking about that basic topic. And it was, they all copied the same basic kind of talk show format. You guys did step out of that a little bit, especially having like the round table, which is now, I think, far more familiar with folks, and then bringing in a guest on top of that. But you were still, these are people who were from large organizations who had large names come in to do the hosting and put a lot of production quality and did it in a very traditional way. This was extremely new from the fact that, yes, everything that you just described was something that you did because you wanted to get familiar with it. You had to learn it and package it all together. But in the end, at least the onset of the series it was a group of grad students that were sitting around having these conversations. And, if you
Timothy Rutherford Johnson once described us as reasonably intelligent.
Reasonably intelligent.
I remember that.
It's my favorite pull quote from the entire history of SoundNotion.
Oh yeah.
And that's actually quite good. I would lead with that. Oh my God. But I mean, and you also had to put up with that kind of attitude. I remember in the days starting and blogging in 2003 and the vitriol that, mainstream traditional print journalist had, not all, but some especially, had toward, you encroaching into that territory. But you also decided to have this show focus on something and really look at it from a long-term legacy perspective. We really are going to put the time into this instead of just doing a couple and then walking away from it. and about a topic that wouldn't normally get this kind of attention. And I think you very quickly started to find out that you were able to bring in what are now and then and now very big names to sit down. I know you guys had Alex Ross. I mean, like, who are some of the big composer names that you remember early on?
I think our favorite the big name composer that we had on is probably Jen Higdon. She was so sweet, and I remember she didn't tell us this before we started rolling, or before we called her on Skype. She told us that she was genuinely a listener of the show and
donated money.
Yeah.
Nice.
And she said she would, when she was going on a trip, she would save some up to listen to on the airplane, and she was just very sweet. And she said that she was a listener before we had contacted her about it, which I had no idea that somebody that who I respected as much as a composer was listening to our couple of chuckleheads making dumb jokes about Lockenman on a podcast.
And going back to what we were talking about on the main episode about networking as a skill for composers, because of this work, I knew Jennifer Higdon. Because of that, when Holly played Jennifer's piece in Chattanooga, I took my composition studio and got to look like a super big shot because, look, Jennifer Higdon knows who I am. And got to go to an after party with all my students. I was like a folk hero,
I remember that after party, yes.
Yeah.
Well, you are a folk hero. We agree on this topic. That is not in debate at this point in time.
Right. Absolutely.
Clearly. But I think...
I was going to say on the format, I think in a lot of ways we made the show, and I'm sure you can empathize with this, the way you create this show and the way you write on your various blogs, that you write Adaptistration because that's the sort of thing that you would read if it didn't exist, right?
Absolutely.
I think in a lot of ways we were making the show that we wanted to listen to. There are a lot of podcasts, and certainly a lot more now than there were 10 years ago. But I personally am not a fan of the high production NPR style shows. I don't listen to any of them. I listen to shows that are very informal and that are about at least 50% of the appeal of the show is the people who make it. And I think for the kinds of podcasts that I like and that I listen to, I show up to them for the topics, for the content, and then I stay for the personalities and the people that make them. And I think those are the kinds of shows that I like, and I think that's the kind of show, maybe without having quite such a clearly articulated vision of it, that's, I think, the kind of show that we were trying to make on SoundNotion.
I think that's a fabulous way to look at it. And because you guys started off as grad students in this, there was the ability to embrace the I don't know without having to worry about how that might be perceived in a negative sense.
I 100% agree with that. Or whether or not we had the permission or not, we took it. For instance, because we didn't edit, one time I forgot the word libretto, and this ended up being the name of an episode. Do you remember this, Dave? I said, he wrote the, what do you call it? The talking part of an opera.
I do remember that we have an episode called The Talking Part of an Opera.
Now, Sam trying to sell himself as a smart guy is not going to say that.
And it's that kind of nonsense that is why we were referred to as reasonably intelligent. Because I think it was another thing that we were spacing on. I made a Helmut Lockenman joke earlier. We were spacing on the title of a work by Lockenman or something like that. And he was like, "Okay, you don't know Lockenman?" And I'm like, whatever. Anyway, but that's what you learn in graduate school. I think more than anything is that you learn how much you don't know, and you develop a much greater as a master's student in particular. I think you learn how to fake that you know a lot of things, and then as a doctoral student, you learn that that's not actually a very valuable skill. And what's more valuable is to be honest and curious about the things that you don't know, because then you learn them and you don't have to fake it anymore.
Well, and I'll go another step with that, is it gives you the freedom to talk and ask questions about third-rail topics that most people avoid.
Yeah.
And that's where the real interesting
and that's when we
conversations
had
come
you
from.
on the show.
just an hour-long third rail. Just yeah. But that's what makes it engaging.
Yeah, we knew enough to know what some good questions to ask were, but not enough to know that some of those questions were not very appropriate or polite.
Well, you did that with your composer guests as well too, and I thought that was always one of the more fascinating parts because it presented a degree of reality, and not to compare it to reality television because it wasn't at all, but it was a degree of a genuine nature that acknowledged the very real problems that if people don't talk about them enough or examine them, regardless of what the outcome of the conversation is, you don't ever see any improvement.
Yeah, absolutely. And we occasionally, I know Sam and I will occasionally, see a blog post or see something in the New York Times or whatever, and we'll text it to somebody and be like, we're gonna restart the podcast to talk about like this one article.
Speaking of memorable episodes and topics like that, Dave, you might have to help me. A composer from Arizona, and we don't have to say his name if that's going to be.
I don't want to say his name. I know who it is.
I can always bleep it over.
a composer, I can't remember his name. He wrote in somewhere, I don't remember. Basically,
it was in HuffPo.
A takedown of John Cage and that kind of music writ large, and we had him on. And he knew he was coming into the Lion's Den and did it. I don't think he defended his point of view very well.
I think he came on and immediately admitted that he had written something that was more polemical than he for the clicks, and it was actually more conciliatory in conversation than he seemed in the article that he'd written.
Actually, that interview would go differently now, Dave, because one of the things that his point of view sort of held was the superiority of the European tradition in music. And him saying that Cage was letting go of that, therefore, as if that's proof enough. And
possibly our longest episode, I will also add. It was just like an hour and 40-minute episode.
I don't know if you know about this, Drew, but in the music theory world, finally the equality movement has hit that place too.
Oh, I think I wrote about that once, and I'm trying to remember
what's his name?
The guy, the correct? Scholar is
Philip Ewell.
Philip Ewell is he's in New York.
Yeah.
But right. He gave a pretty spicy talk at as much as spicy talks are given at the Society of Music Theory conference. He gave a pretty spicy talk at SMT 2019. It
got attention.
The plenary session, and that was subsequently published in article form in the one of the major music theory journals in 2020, and then was this huge topic of a lot of conversation, a lot of articles, and a whole lot more sessions at SMT 2020.
A 12-page anonymous rebuttal from the Schenkerian Society.
Oh yeah, the Schenker Society journal, which by the way, I wasn't reading anyway. But
cowards.
It's like prison Schenk.
Yeah, that kind of yeah.
Bunch of cowards is all I have to say.
If anybody's listening to this and does not know what we're talking about, this is a music theorist, German music theorist Heinrich Schenker, whose theories of musical organization are an entire subfield of music theory in itself. And that's really all you need to know about Heinrich Schenker.
But I can guarantee just watching the two of you respond to all of it, 100% of the viewers are now 100% more interested in the topic.
Sure.
Yeah,
sure.
Yeah. Anything that's going to cause that much excitement, it's got to be interesting.
I will say,
I'll slow down and watch that wreck. Yeah.
Ewell's talk from SMT 2019 is, I'm pretty sure, available on YouTube, and it's really good. He's a really good writer. In addition to being wicked smart, he is a really good writer. And the article itself is really well written. It's totally readable. There's a very minimal amount of theory jargon in it.
It's academic enough with references that that you really get the feeling it's a researched thing, even though it sounds personable.
Well, and the research in it is as much referring to race theory scholarship as much as it is referring to theory scholarship, and it's just a really, really good, well-written article, and it is in an open access journal called Music Theory Online.
And, that occurrence, Dave and I have discussed this, paired with my frustration over, I've been teaching music theory like constantly for 5 years straight now, and disillusionment with what I teach. And the symbol for that, music theory teachers will understand, I'm not going to teach how to voice lead augmented six chords this year, because there are more important things to learn. And there are certain people who would find that an incredibly controversial statement. But part of that is the idea of, Western art music and the analysis of same is a white supremacist activity in certain ways.
And this would have been a great SoundNotion
I was
year.
going to say, this is pretty much the environment right here with both of you listening to this. This is the way that things would unload. And this is what made SoundNotion such an engaging podcast. And I think, I'm maybe speaking for myself, I certainly miss it. And I'm sure a lot of people miss it as well, too.
Well, for an idea of how spicy it could get, Dave and I are best friends, I would say. Dave's my best friend. And we would end episodes where I would text Dave 10 minutes or 15 minutes after the episode, or he would text me and apologize, because we would get going at each other.
We got a little heated. And I will say, in the 5 years or so since we stopped making SoundNotion, we have, I would say, sometimes more than others, but at least 2 or 3 times come very, very perilously close to rebooting it in some form.
Yes.
We'd probably call it something else and use different technology and different platforms and everything, kind of leverage what we learned to do something else. Like at one point, I even bought a domain name. That's how serious we got. But that's the mark of a serious endeavor, as far as I'm concerned. But anyway, it's fun, and we miss it too. And I'm glad to hear that it meant something to other people.
Well, I hope it does come back, because that was the end question here, is, are there actual plans, even for like just a short limited run? Here are the things we know we want to talk about, and let's set aside 4 months and do some episodes.
That's one of the formats that we've talked about, is short runs. We've also talked about, I don't know, a bunch of other things. But yeah, Sam?
One format that Dave, I kind of have the idea to do like documentary style things, therefore leaving what the actual content is could be a little more open. Dave had an idea years and years ago to do a series where you take an educated non-specialist and sort of walk them through a challenging piece of music and teach them how to appreciate it and perhaps even enjoy it, And I have my guy picked out, the guy that I already mentioned on the other show, Punya Mishra, because he's just one of the smartest guys I've ever met, but he's not a musician, but he loves music.
Oh, I would go to town with you just using the word appreciation as well.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, we call really music appreciation in college is not actually anything related to music appreciation. We don't.
It's a music history class.
Teach those classes?
Oh yeah, for non-music majors, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
Okay.
Music. I mean, it's like super high level overview. Here's why Handel was great, but it's not anything related to what I would describe as appreciating musical sounds, which is what I would rather teach.
It's a trigger word for me, and just in general is appreciate, because another rabbit hole of a topic.
The word I would use is maybe engage.
Engagement
to engage music.
Music engagement. Right. Yeah, being able to broaden someone's view in and of itself is
to hear a musical sound and think a meaningful thought about it is non-trivial and requires practice and some background. Doesn't have to be like reading a score, but it does require some knowledge of what to expect. And that's what a class like that I would like to teach would be.
Well, damn it, this is another topic. You see, you have to bring this show back to talk more about this.
Our show is going to come back as basically just the class that Sam and I wish that they would let us just teach.
Yeah, absolutely.
Everybody gets an A.
You've gone from being grad students to now teachers, and now here's everything we want to bitch about for about 4 solid months.
Well, here's
that's basically what we do on Skype all the time anyway.
Dave, I'm actually going in. I'm telling the department chair when we have meet next week, the assistant department chair, not Megan, the one that I have to deal with.
Sam's wife is the department chair.
Yeah.
Important fact.
Yeah, I'm endorsing the idea of eliminating physical textbooks and using digital services instead.
There is,
And
for the first time in a very long time, some that don't suck.
yeah. And if I'm going to seriously curtail the or how a quote advanced the analysis stuff gets, it gets a lot easier to do it without a textbook too. So anyway, that's but we're starting to do the classes online, and I need to make them adopt this textbookless version before they put everything online.
Right.
All right. Well, I'm going to kind of wrap this up. I'm going to ask you each kind of an impossible question. But I'm glad we took the time to be able to do this, because I think acknowledging what SoundNotion was, its place, and how it really launched a lot of things that people kind of take for granted and enjoy now. And it really was pioneering in its day. I'm going to point people to the SoundNotion archives. And, if they've got one chance to be able to hook someone in to watch the rest of the episodes, what's the one episode you think, each of you, what do you think the one episode that they should watch first?
I'm not sure if this is up there, and I'll have to figure out what the number is and what the topic is. But we had a really great conversation with a couple of the guys from So Percussion, talking about some of the work that they were doing, and they were doing. It wasn't exactly. I don't think it was a Kickstarter, but they had some really cool. Something about merch was in the title. Maybe like bespoke merch or something like that. But anyway, they had done some really cool things with these like tangible giveaways for people that were supporting them in a way that wasn't just like, here's a recording of the thing that you could also listen to in 75 other places. Like, here is a cool object of art that you will be glad that you have in exchange for supporting this cool musical composition and performance and recording project that we had.
I think I've got it. It's episode 122, Bespoke Merch.
I nailed
There
the
it
title.
is.
Thank you. And they did a very cool thing. It was a piece they were doing. I think it was a Dan Truman piece, Neither Anvil Nor Pulley. And it has this like Scandinavian fiddle thing in the beginning of it, and it uses this kind of traditional dance. And the way they were doing this, they had gone to like a thrift store and gotten a crap load of LPs from a thrift store, and they had used tape to like tape over in specific proportions around the radius of the thing, so that when you would put it on a player, it would skip to express this traditional dance rhythm in a kind of slow way around the LP, and it was really cool. And that was in fact, if somewhere maybe on the YouTube video, if there's like a poster image for this or something, it's probably one of them holding up one of these records. I don't know if there's an image of it anywhere.
Let me see if it's in the. Well, no, it's not in the episode overview.
Well,
I'll have to dig it up.
It might. I don't know if this was when we had moved to YouTube or not yet, but anyway, it was a very cool conversation with some amazing musicians. So Percussion, if you are you've never heard So Percussion or anything like that, they're a percussion quartet, and they do all kinds of really cool composition, and they are just lights out performers, and they've got the kind of deals with like. Probably Vic Firth does a bunch of these, but they have really good performance videos on YouTube of these compositions, in addition to the recordings that they've made, and they're just super nice. And we're doing really clever, creative stuff. In addition to the music that they were making that was clever and creative, they were doing other things that were part of kind of the community building and building a community of creative and curious and engaged people around their music. That was really exciting.
I was going to go with that episode, believe it or not, because those guys are so great. But lacking that, I would say one of the most informative and sort of opened up into and it's really Dave's topic, but it was so interesting and you learned so many different things. Papa Smoofle, I'm pretty sure, is the name of the episode.
Yes.
Who is the guy, Dave? I can't remember his name.
Well, it's Daniel Spreadbury, who is the nicest person in the world of music notation software development. And it was at the time still in the early stages of developing Dorico as the product marketing manager of Steinberg's Dorico project.
And there are worlds of information behind any software that's being developed and having to do with, fonts and just just the amount of stuff that's involved in making a program that will notate music and cover every possible ramification is fascinating, and nobody knows more about it than that guy.
I don't think I saw that episode. I'm not pulling it up in a search really quick, but we'll dig it up and make sure we put it as a overlay here on the video.
Smoofle is SMUFL.
That's probably why I wasn't able to find it.
Which, what does it stand for, Dave?
Standard music font layout, maybe? Something like that? It is, anyway, yeah, Daniel is delightful and brilliant and kind and, just unapologetically British.
Unapologetically British.
That's the episode
here
title.
It is. I found it. SoundNotion episode 118.
Right there. There we go. That must have been our prime when we were firing on all cylinders, Dave.
As before, I probably like in between jobs or something, I had a bunch of time to think and prepare.
Yeah.
That's basically why we stopped doing the show, is because it was just I was doing a ton of stuff and Sam was doing a ton of stuff, and we just didn't have the overhead to do it well. And so that's why we started doing them a little bit more sporadically, and then we decided we needed to call it.
But we had Kronos Quartet, the godfather of contemporary music ensembles, on the show before it ended.
Hashtag content.
Hashtag content. Well, and on that, I think this is a perfect place to let this go as well. I encourage everyone to go through and just start finding some episodes to listen to. We'll get you directed to the right place to make sure you can find everything that is available in the podcast. But boy, it's just so much good stuff. And if nothing else, here's hoping you guys start it back up at least sometime soon, even if it's in, short, limited format.
Sure.
Right.
Thanks
We'll
so
just
much for
fire
having
it
us,
up when
Drew.
we have something real exciting. But thank you. This has been a lot of fun.
All right. Take care, guys. And thanks, everybody. We will talk later. Bye-bye.
One of the things we discovered is that if you just ask somebody to come and talk about themselves on Skype for an hour, a lot of people are super down for that.
Oh, yeah.